Welcome back. I am full of a cold today, so I'm not going to talk very much. I'm going to let you guys talk. So, what I was going to do, I have a couple of things to say here. Did anyone, those of you who are on my Facebook page probably saw I posted this today. Did any of you see this? They now have telepathic rats.
Oh Lord.
Last night, I think I said on Facebook, just last night I was thinking, wouldn't it be great if we had telepathic rats? And then I get up this morning and some scientist has created telepathic rats.
Those are powerful dreams.
I wasn't. But
Kind of like the opening line of the article when it says, when the guy from Duke says, a lot of people didn't think it was possible. I was like,
it's funny, I was talking on Facebook with, he's actually the partner of a friend of mine, and he runs a graduate neuroscience lab. And he basically said, what's the point of having rats if you don't make them telepathic? Which I thought was a really good question. And I was posing back the same question to him. We have these robots and no one puts lasers on them to take over the world. What's the point of having robots if you don't weaponize them? The same kind of question. So, but I'm not sure this is truly transhumanism. This was just such an amazing article this morning.
it's trans-robotism.
Trans-robotism. I like that, yeah. Let's have a look at the video. I've not watched this yet. Let's see what it says. Read the article, no.
You see now the two animals in two different behavior bars. And we have one trial now where the encoder sees a light that refers to the left bar. It goes there and presses the bar and gets its reward. Well, now the brain signal of this animal is being transmitted to the decoder, who doesn't have an indication of the light because they're both on. So at this point, the decoder presses the correct lever, gets the reward, and the encoder gets a supplemental reward. So this is another trial showing on the right lever, the light showed up, the animal got it, the encoder is transmitting the information to the decoder is now decoding the message, press the right bar, and gets the reward. So they're collaborating. They're doing a communication through a brain-to-brain interface.
See, when I imagined telepathy, I didn't think you'd actually put a wire in someone's head and connect them to someone else. I think the word telepathy actually means something else. But
It's more like telephonic rats.
Telephonic rats, yeah. But this...
So does that mean that Doc Brown was ahead of his time?
Yes, I think so.
It's an interesting scenario.
But one of the things I read in the article, they've had rats on different continents. That yes, there's a bit of a timeline, but they're sending from one rat's brain to a rat on another continent, telling him which lever to pull, which lever to pull. So, we now have intercontinental telepathic rats.
So do you understand what the nature of the link-up is, or how the connectivity is working there?
From what I understand, this is not my area at all, but they appear to be, if you look at the kind of headsets, we've got some of them here on campus, like the emote headsets. They measure certain forms of stimulus and response, brainwave activity, alpha waves, ECG signals in the brain, different electrical impulses. And we can measure those, so you can train a system. So you can look at a computer screen and you can think up and you can train a box to go up, and you can think down and you can train a box to go down. And the way I think they're doing this is they're measuring whatever the signals are coming out of the brain are, transmitting them, and decoding those signals to another rat, putting those signals back in, which gives it the information it needs for which switch. It's as simple as which switch do I press out of two options. That's all the information they're sending. But it's like sending the difference between up and down, left and right. Yeah. Anyone got any thoughts on this or anything? Yeah, so here we are. It's an array an array of microelectrodes, about 100 the width of a human hair, implanted into the primary motor cortex, processes the brain that processes movement. It records the activity as the rat makes the decision, and then sends that activity to the other rat. Interesting. This was the first news article I read when I woke up this morning and thought, yeah, I think I'll go back to bed. It did quite stun me though, this idea of actually being able to measure some thought process, send it, decode it, and pass that information to some other being. You could say, what's the difference between writing it down, giving it to someone, they decode it, and the direct sending, I think it's pretty amazing. Yeah, this is it. They've done it across continents. So an encoder rat in Brazil sent to North Carolina. Work with this, an accuracy of the same as those of the next to each other. So, yeah. But there's a lot of people saying this is really exciting stuff. Wake up call if you haven't seen this stuff, you know. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. I thought, Philip.
Isn't it similar to what Warwick did with people with implanting his wrist? It's the same kind of thing, just nervous signal.
Well, it's funny, someone from the University of Warwick giving it, I mean, he's at the University of Reading, isn't he? It's Kevin Warwick at the University of Reading, so some UK researchers. But yeah, any of you seen Kevin Warwick's work? I've actually met Kevin Warwick a couple of times. He's not a very nice man. I don't like him. But his books are very egotistical as well, all about himself. But have you read any of them?
I haven't, no. I still haven't read his book or any of his books yet. I've read papers, but I haven't read a book by him.
He does some good work though. This guy, a bit like Stella, he implants a lot of things into himself and then tries to control robotic devices with these. And it is very similar. He's reading electro signals from within. He also puts RFID tags in his arms so that he can switch lights on and off in the building, things like that. He does some interesting work.
I was thinking of the one he did with his wife, where they implanted his wrist and she had an implant in her, and they could, if she squeezed her hand, he could feel it in his arm.
Well, he also did the one with jewellery where they both wore some jewellery, and based on sensors changed the colour of his wife's jewellery. If he was angry, his wife's jewellery changed colour, so she knew he was angry. A practical use of the technology. So he's done, The Eye Cyborg is his most famous book, but I don't like this book. I don't think it's a very good book at all. Some of his work's interesting, but I think this is a terrible book. And these are some of his projects, the cyborg projects. This is the one, his first project, where he put silicon chips, transponders into his forearm, and these had RFID tags that could allow him to control things around the lab. Not much different to billionaires, millionaires now put transponder chips inside their children so that they can track them if they're kidnapped. Okay, so mind-reading mice. There's an interesting set of articles on the BBC. This is quite a good resource for your the project we've set you just now. There's a really nice set of articles that have come up over quite recently. I mean, this was December 2012. They've had a bit of a feature on this. And they're asking a lot of questions around future thinking. Questions like, will we ever have cyborg brains? But there's a whole set of these. I've just pulled a few up. Will men and machines merge? memory chip to record memories. So a nice little resource on the BBC for some of the questions you're asking yourself. And they are quite interesting. They show little short movies and then they have a discussion. I think this is Kurtzville again.
Great, everybody made.
Oh,
They'll work remotely, so this is a big...
Go away. We're going to have adverts on all of these. Wakey, wakey.
It comes from Formosa.
Well, in the future, we're going to be spending a lot of our time in virtual reality, which won't be game-like. It'll be just as real as real reality. This will be routinely done, basically to make us smarter. We'll be able to think in the cloud, have direct brain-to-brain communication. We'll be able to
Here's an interesting concept for you. Virtual reality will make us smarter. That was first proposed by a future theorist called Howard Rheingold. Anyone know what he called this? He used the term intelligence amplification. This is a guy called Howard Rheingold. And this was proposed quite a long time ago. He wrote a book that was called Virtual Reality. It was one of the first ever books on virtual reality in the very early days when it all looked really pixely and wobbly with flat shaded surfaces. But virtual reality was just being invented, and he was a journalist and media theorist and academic who started exploring this, and what he proposed was that if you think about learning to do something, how do we as humans learn how to do something? If I want you to fix a car, there are a number of ways I can teach you how to fix a car. I can tell you about it, I can show you pictures, that's one way. If I tell you about it, and then you go over to the car, that's pretty difficult. There's a big disconnect between what I've told you and what you're doing. If I show you pictures, maybe it's a bit easier because you've had some pictures. If I take you to the car and get you to fix the car, then the disconnect, you learn on a real car, and then you're able to fix a car because you don't have that disconnect between the things I tell you and the actual act. What he said was virtual reality, because of its nature of simulating the real, allows us to work on the important intelligent problems rather than work on the translation of information. So translating from written text to the physical presence. If we work in VR, we only work on the problem, we don't work on the translation as well. Probably not used exactly the correct language there, but hopefully you'll get the idea. So a guy called Howard Rheingold. So this is what Kurtzville's alluding to here in this particular clip, this idea of virtual reality making us smarter. So it's a famous
It's going to make
concept.
us smarter. We'll be able to think in the cloud, have direct brain-to-brain communication. We'll be able to think deeper,
I
bigger.
didn't realise that. Direct brain-to-brain communication, you see? It's already there.
Thoughts, access all human knowledge right from our brains. The first observation we make is that technology, particularly information technology, is accelerating. It's growing exponentially in power. And that's been true since the 1890 American Census. Right now, we're doubling the power of computers every year for the same price. We're doing even more than that. Computers, therefore, will be 1 billion times more powerful than they are today, with the same cost in 25 years. We're also shrinking their size. So a computer that took up half a building, cost tens of millions of dollars, that all thousands of us shared when I was a student. This is now thousands of times more powerful, a million times cheaper, 100,000 times more. We'll do both of those things again in 25 years. If you look at the implications of those trends, particularly the ability to create computers that are as smart as people by 2029, and they continue to grow their capabilities, in my view, will merge.
I love the way he says, by 2029, not by 2030. It's going to be in 2029, on the 2nd of December. He just has this, he always does this, he always says these kind of dates.
It's never wrong.
It'll take 11 years, it'll take 12, I don't know.
With those machines. We will be making profound transformations in human society as we get to, say, the 2040s. And that's such a singular change in human history that we borrow this metaphor from physics and call it a singularity. There's different implications at different time frames. We're already feeling it. It's already having profound.
I find his language interesting here. First time I saw this. When he talks about this, or when I watched this for the first time, he talks about we as some kind of collective group. We borrow this term from physics. It's actually he invented this term and brought it in, and he's trying to make it a more accepted term. It feels to me like he's trying to make us accept it by saying this, we have borrowed it, because this is a very controversial theory.
I missed it. What was the phrase that he borrowed? I missed it. What was the phrase that he
Singularity.
Singularity.
This idea of the technology
Right.
singularity.
Right. I just wasn't sure.
He's saying we borrowed this phrase from physics. Who's the we? He was the one who proposed this and developed it. So it's I think he's a very interesting chap. But it says, as we said last time, people who criticise his books say there's brilliance and there's rubbish in there, and it's kind of all mixed together. So and. I feel a little bit the same about Ray Kurzweil. It's a real mishmash of stuff that doesn't sound right, stuff that seems quite logical.
If you go out, say, 10 years, cars will drive themselves. Human longevity will be greatly extended because we'll be reprogramming the software underlying biology. We'll have search engines that not only are looking for keywords, but are based on actually having read and understood what web pages are saying. They've been listening in on our conversations and giving you helpful hints as you go through the day, basically not waiting for you to ask a question. So that's 10 years. Go out to 2029, computers will be as smart as people. They'll go inside our brain, interact with our biological neurons. That's something we can already do. Parkinson's patients with computers into their brains, deaf people, but we will enhance our intelligence. I believe we've done that already, even if the gadgets aren't inside our bodies, just carrying on our belt makes us smarter, but we ultimately will be far smarter, healthier, and I think it'll be a more peaceful existence because we're going to be wealthier and there'll be less scarcity to fight over.
Yeah, lots of big comments. Anyway, this is, we discussed this or mentioned it a little bit. This is the news with Ray Kurzweil at Google at the moment. So the technologist speaks about his ambitious plan to build a powerful artificial intelligence. This was only last month he announced this. He's working at Google at the moment. Google are backing him, giving him millions of dollars to try and do this. There we have the ubiquitous HAL image. So he has a new job at Google, and what does it entail? He plans to build a prodigious artificial intelligence which he hopes will, look at the phrase, understand the world. He's talking about this thing we've been mentioning, context, intentionality. It will have understanding to a much more sophisticated degree than anything built before it. So this AI will be designed to analyse the vast quantities of information Google collects and then serve as a super intelligent personal assistant. You could argue we already have that with the Google search bar in many ways. You could eavesdrop on your every phone conversation and email exchange and then provide interesting and important information you never know you wanted. How annoying. Sounds like a scary smart version of Google. No. And there's a video he talks about it when he says there is no more important project than understanding intelligence and recreating it. I envision a fundamental approach based on everything we understand about how the brain works. There are some things we don't understand, so I plan to go and explore my own ideas about how things work. Well, one of the things I find interesting about this is this news came out as I started reading Galatea 2.2. So I'm obviously seeing a lot of parallels, because I'm 2/3 of the way through that book now, between what Kurzweil intends to do and what Lentz in the book has a very similar kind of mindset, I think, to how it works. Okay. Well, that's what I wanted to just get you started on a few things I found that kind of touched on what we talked before. Any comments or questions on that? On Patricia?
I thought, talking about the virtual reality, the intelligence amplification, something I thought of was on the project that Carly and I are working on, we're working with an augmented reality, kind of tutorial thing. And one question that we came up with is, at first we were thinking augmented reality will probably enhance the comprehension for the students, but now we're thinking that actually it could hinder it, because a tutorial isn't necessarily, if it's showing you how to do something step by step, are you actually comprehending what you're doing?
Yes, it depends what you're teaching people.
Right.
Depends what you're teaching them. I run companies that build simulators, and one of the things that most of the literature shows is that you should actually, two things that help. One is the realism of the simulator compared to the realism of the environment lowers that cognitive jump you have to make. We're trying to teach safety, we're not trying to teach. So it's important that you concentrate on safety, when you're in there, not concentrate. And the other thing is, make the interface as simple as possible so people don't have to learn how to control something. Again, because you're taking away from what you're trying to teach them at the time. So both of those things, the literature says, work pretty well, actually.
When he talks about cloud-based thought and how all of our minds are going to be in the cloud, what does that say about knowledge that might have, knowledge that has a little bit of emotion tied to it? Because at some point, I think we might have been going over this at some point, how in some sense knowledge and emotion sort of in some ways are connected in one way or another. So I guess I can sort of imagine a nightmare scenario of almost a Vulcan mind meld, if you will, of you get all of this knowledge of humanity, but also all of this, crippling emotional transference, and you burst into tears or want to shoot yourself.
That's a really big question about emotion and its linked to knowledge. Human knowledge can be categorized in many different forms. We've talked about the kind of more explicit, implicit, active knowledge. So then the different levels of factual, process knowledge, strategic knowledge, the different things we have. Emotion begins to touch on the bigger questions we've talked about, like consciousness, and the reasons and purposes for doing things. You may know how it's right back to Ken Campbell in that little film clip at the start with the chess machine. You can know how to play chess and beat someone at chess, but do you know why you're playing chess and why you're beating them, and do you feel happy when you win? So it's right back to those very first questions we were asking, that you're just bringing back up, that you're bringing back the same questions. And that ties into consciousness more down the question of linking knowledge together.
Regarding the quote, where it says there's no more important project than understanding intelligence and recreating it, I feel as though that's been managed since day one, or rational logic man since day one. And it's I don't know whether we take pride in our progression and our advancement of society, technology, but is it going to come to a point where I feel as though with all these predictions that what else is there to know? And it brings up the point where, you know, the whole ignorance is bliss, and we're touching whether it's emotional. A computer is able to retain all the information of the world, you know, vast amount of history up until 2029. But if a human does that and is able to retain, I don't think he won't be a human anymore. I mean, so I'd rather be.
Well, that's another point we've been talking about, that does machine intelligence have to replicate human intelligence with the limitations of our human, or is it a different kind of intelligence? And also, to be honest, I think there's a lot more we have to learn as humans. There's a very interesting discussion. I listened to the equivalent of NPR in England is Radio 4. It's a talk radio station. A lot of documentary science programs, and there's a science program, a physics professor, Professor Brian Cox, runs on that, called The Infinite Monkey Cage. And he basically sits around every week with a bunch of physicists, and they talk about science projects. I listen to it when I'm driving. And they recently had a discussion about this very topic. Can humans continue to develop their knowledge and continue to push the boundaries? And one of them gave the example of a dog. You know, if you try, you can't teach a dog quantum physics because a dog has a limit to its intelligence. He said, so why do we think we don't have limits to our intelligence? Are there certain things in the world, certain concepts that human beings will never understand because we physically can't, just like a dog can't learn physics?
See, I think that's the whole point of this whole, like, transhumanism. It's like it's an attempt to answer a question that might not be there, but we're trying and wasting a lot of, not even wasting, that's the wrong word, but putting a lot of time and effort trying to find this answer where we still don't, so many people changing the questions and changing the attempts.
And there may be certain things, and I mean, the physicists in this particular show I was listening to were talking about the nature of quantum physics, string theory at basic levels, but it applies to consciousness, understanding consciousness as well, or any of these. And I don't have an answer to this, but I'd never thought of human beings like that before as being potentially limited like that, but it made me think about it.
What was the radio program called?
Infinite Monkey Cage.
Infinite Monkey Cage.
There's about 3 or 4 series, they're all direct, really.
One thought that I had on that, there's this, I guess this idea that if we can develop an AI that's even marginally more intelligent than us, then why wouldn't it in turn be able to do the same thing? So maybe applying that to the physics question, or how it was phrased with the dog. If we're not able to understand it, are we at least intelligent enough to be able to change ourselves so that we can understand it maybe at some point in the future?
Mm.
So kind of reverse.
Like the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, we designed the world's most powerful computer to design another computer. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Anything else?
I have a few thoughts, but go ahead.
I guess I just want to respond to Gabriel. Well, first of all, maybe before I talk, maybe we should clarify what it is you were suggesting. By the last thing you were saying, because I had some thoughts, but I don't know if I'm understanding you correctly. So
I was saying more as the computer is able to retain, if a computer is able to retain, since, you know, the recording of mankind's history since day one, I'll consider the same now, or as he was saying, 2029 or the 2040s, the human mind was able to, like, retain all that information. I don't think it wouldn't become human. I think the whole emotional morality, ethics of what a human is would cease to exist. So I brought the whole ignorance is bliss because
you're saying ignorance is humanity. Are you saying that a human that knows everything that's happened in human history thus far is not human anymore?
I say it would take a lot to be the same after all. I don't know.
Well, what about knowing? Like, at what point do you know too much to be human? Like, where are you drawing the line?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
good point.
That's a good question.
That's why I use the lamest sense of the world as ignorance is
But
bliss.
all of these things come back in some ways to Dennett's zombie argument in some way of or the ship argument. If we replace the neurons, do we stop becoming human? If we attach a processor to our brain which allows us to perform calculations 20 times faster, are we still human? And these kind of changes, it's a very interesting question. Things we change in ourselves, how do they stop us becoming, or changes from being human?
I was going to say this, you go between like augmented like virtual reality, like for example like a flight simulator, or like those things that like pilots and astronauts used to use. If if they fail, or it's just behind the program. But even
What do you mean if the people using them fail?
Yeah. But even drones that we use in Iraq now, that people equate that to using like a joystick. I just think the ethics is going to be the concern in the future. I think that's my.
Well, I think it's a concern now. I would agree with that.
I'm glad we're worried about that now. But
Did you want to say something, Brian? Oh, sorry, Brian was.
Sorry. So I guess there's the aspect of reductionism. I'm big into biopsychology, and the phrase that's used in biopsychology is our reality is nothing other than the opening and closing of a sodium channel. So
What did you say? Our reality is nothing.
Is nothing other than the opening and closing of a sodium channel.
Which is in the graduate discussion I read this afternoon.
And so like the whole aspect, I guess, that Amy brought up with if you change even just one neuron, your reality is changing. So to me, yes, the human has changed. It might not be, it's still human in some respects, but it's still not the same human.
Yeah.
There were a couple of I want to speak to a few things, but I can wait.
I feel like the whole thing with efficacy concerning simulations and how money will go over. Yeah, I don't think it's really an issue with the ethics behind the technology. We will always have technology built to kill people. They're all equally unethical or ethical, depending on your way of looking at it. But the issue is completely with how we react to the ability to use a joystick now to go firebomb people and mow them down, and how much that's different from just charging at them with a bunch of people's spears. So all you gotta do is risk. It's not an issue with the machine or the morality. It's gotta be us.
I think there is a difference in perception, though. That if I stand in front of you with a spear and I put that into you, there's a certain set of feelings, emotions, reactions, visual, sensory I have. If I'm remote pressing a button, it's a different set of emotional.
But it's also risk. I mean, you're not in the line of fire when
just lost my train of thought. But one thing I was getting back to, where we were describing the idea that you're no longer going to be human. Well, one thing that humanity's really never had to deal with is throughout our written history, we've basically been the same creature, more or less. We don't have written history necessarily going back to when there was Neanderthals or whatever. We can just kind of take guesses. We can see some evidence. So there runs the issue of if we actually get to the point where you've got human, the post-human, whatever you want to call it, how are we going to deal with a substantial difference, a change in the species because of technology?
What do you mean by deal?
Well, basically, as I said, we've always had kind of one human species. As I said, we at least in our written history, we never had to deal with the issue of Homo sapien versus Neanderthal. Dealing with the idea of humans as they are now, versus if there's kind of a sharing the planet deal. Mind you, I'm using the term sharing kind of subjectively. But if we have humans now dealing on the same planet as post-humans, or humans, or humans that are more than what we are now at the same time, all the issues surrounding that.
Well, Kurzweil basically said that. He said we are going to have computers working on our biology at the microscopic level, extending our lives, doing certain things basically for people who can afford it. I mean, that's the unsaid line there. So,
going back to the ethics debate, I remember seeing something on Gizmodo that was, it was a question of they've got bioenhanced, they're getting augmented soldiers and everything like that, like exoskeletons and a few other programs together. A bunch of different countries are, and they have the argument of whether or not that sort of augmented soldier is to be considered a form of bioterrorism, because and whether it was on like the ethics of using kind of in a different sense from something like a drone, where it's still ostensibly a human. A full-on natural human has to be the one to hit the button. This is very much, I guess the analog would be like Captain America, of like this is a super soldier, somebody that's been injected or had sort of biomechanic stuff implanted in him, and I think that's a little more scary. On both a home front and a defense front. Home front being, I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm more scared of the possibility of these machines being used in warfare, because at an individual soldier level it's beyond the drone, because again, there is still like an imperfect sort of normal human being that has to push the button that sends the thing that blows the people up.
There's a lot of questions in that.
Right.
Well,
no, that's okay.
Yeah, well, I actually think, I like what he's gone now, and I forget his name. Whoever was back there, some of the weapon technology and like the ethics of weapon technology raised a good point that like, well, I can't really think of any reason why our modern weapon technology is any less ethical than a spear. And one good example of that is there's a point, I can't remember, in the 15th century, 16th century, where the papacy outlawed the use of crossbows because they were too deadly, right? I mean, it's a crossbow, it doesn't really seem like it's the most deadly thing in the world. It was at the time, I guess. So the point is that it's that this, well, I guess our frame of reference, it makes it seem like our drones are more dangerous, or augmented soldiers are less ethical for some reason. I think that's kind of invalid.
In 30, 40 years, we'll look back and we'll see.
Right, and even like the augmented soldiers. I mean, soldiers like Greek soldiers were augmented by performing calisthenics. It's not like that's any. I mean, fundamentally, it doesn't seem any less natural than.
But the problem then becomes if you do have, like, the difference between calisthenics and these sort of things is that calisthenics is a natural thing. You aren't.
Not really.
Well, but what I mean is like, at the end of the day, you are not being injected with anything that the government can very easily, or the army can very easily, that can very easily take control away from you. At the end of the day, it is your body developing, like it is your muscles being developed physically, naturally. Yes, it seems like ridiculous amounts of exercise, but that is still natural tissue production. Whereas something like these sorts of implants, not necessarily. I can very easily envision a nightmare scenario where 18-year-old kids get into the army and they get stealthily implanted with something. It could happen very easily at a medical check.
War is a human thing. Like computers ran the world. But I don't think computers would be able to say war is a probable thing, because why would computers even want?
Have you never seen the movie War Games?
My point is that okay. Look at how do people how would an ancient soldier augment himself by in taking in, they didn't have hypodermic needles, right? But they're still taking in special kinds of chemicals and things like that. Except the chemicals are just protein or whatever. As opposed to now they're anabolic steroids. It's a different kind of chemical, I guess, but they're still taking chemicals and working out, or they're augmenting the body in some way.
The fundamental question we're talking about here is something which we'll probably come on to later in the course, which at the moment we're trying to focus a little bit on artificial intelligence. This idea of body augmentation and becoming more than human, post-human, I think is something we will look at in a further stage of the course a little bit later, or talk about a bit more. It's moving away a little bit from the kind of artificial intelligence focus
that we
a
have.
little bit that we have. Not that it isn't interesting,
Right.
but
You want to bring us back to the...
No, I just lost for a second, so I don't know what calisthenics are.
Jumping jacks.
No, really?
Oh, I missed it.
Push-ups. What are push-ups calisthenics technically? I'm not sure.
Body weight.
you're asking
Isn't it
me.
basic?
There was like
That's
something back here wanted to
high
say.
impact interval
There
training.
were a couple of hands up.
I was gonna say, when we were talking about super forces and stuff, I don't really see what's scarier than a guy who's 6 foot tall, full of muscles because the government injected him, or because he worked out for hours a day. I mean, you still gotta be low, I don't see what's scarier.
Okay, that brings us back to where we probably don't want to go yet.
I don't understand the whole natural, like, we do things that aren't natural every day. Like, there's nothing natural in Mountain Dew. Like, we eat Cheetos that's not made of anything natural.
You're wearing glasses.
Yeah, exactly. That's
You're
exactly.
augmenting yourself.
Yeah, so if we didn't, we need
Cyborg.
these things. Otherwise, we would die. Like, we use tools to our advantage. Otherwise, we would be almost no separate from the animals. So the whole natural versus unnatural thing, it's kind of something that we kind of might have to abandon if we want to pursue things like this.
And I think that ties in very well to, as you've repeatedly said, about objects being part of us and that kind of philosophy.
Right, my response to that is to challenge that, the assumptions that keep that division in place, right? So fundamentally what's in part the problem is that we have somewhat inadequate, especially in our ordinary ways of speaking, we have a rather inadequate and inaccurate grasp of what we kind of sort of intuit to be the natural, right? And the relationship between things that we think somehow are not natural or unnatural. And that the definition of what's unnatural slides quite interestingly from period of time to period of time. So, you know, we could say a common phrase among people who do queer theory is the only unnatural act is one that cannot be performed. And it's an interesting phrase to keep in mind because sodomy was often thought to be an unnatural act. It was put into that category. And so that statement, that ordinary statement is saying, well, wait a minute, you know, sodomy is quite a natural thing because it can be done, right? When we're talking about machine enhancing things, these machines are actually products of our own human labor and conceptualization. And so we might think of them as other, but there's a fundamental forgetfulness in that. So you and I wear glasses, and we might think that these are non-human things, but in fact that's where the error is. It's not only part of you, it's part, your very existence as a person who's constituted, who's placed inside of a vast network of historical and social relations, right? We forget all about the kinds of labor and the social and the historical relations that are realized in this tool, right? So we just think of it as a thing, but in fact it's an event of human energy and thought, but also of other kinds of natural processes as well.
It's interesting, Patrick, I teach exactly the same thing in HCI. It's the fundamental thing about HCI is taking an object and what can you do with it? Every possible action that can be performed with that object. It's you examine the actions and then you look at which actions are more likely to be performed with it. You know, so this idea of doing everything you possibly can is a natural thing.
Using a tool for
even using it for something it's not meant to be. If it can be done, it's a natural.
Yeah.
When you said things in other classes about like tools, or like you said now about tools still being part of the human in some way, if Criswell succeeds in making, or maybe not in Criswell, but later, if it makes some kind of artificial consciousness more than intelligence, would that be as human as, like you said, like a spoon in previous classes, or would it be something else and more or less?
My hunch is, without really puzzling through this, because this is the kind of question I'd like to think more about, but my quick hunch is that early in the process, these machine intelligence mechanisms or AI mechanisms or machine learning technologies, that these things will be more like what you and I would call tools or objects. However, one of the things that's clearly dawning as the technology is enhanced and develops is that these things gain in certain measures or degrees of autonomy. So what we don't know, right, and this is sort of where the fantasy takes over, what we don't know is how autonomous the machines that are the product of human labor can become, right? And I think we'll only know the answer to that as it happens. That's my quick reaction. So I wouldn't want to put it into a conversation about being more or less human, but I would want to think about machine autonomy, maybe using that kind of language.
It's my turn finally. No, I'm just kidding. But no, I actually just wanted to make a point about in the Encyclopedia of Bioethics reading.
Yeah.
I just thought it kind of went with what you guys were saying. They were saying like the majority of people tend to agree with augmentation for humans that if it's fixing a deficiency, so wearing your glasses or even the cochlear implants, or to bring you, if you're, if you have like a perfect human, you have bad eyesight, it's okay to improve, to augment, to make you equal with a perfect human. But then when the majority of people start feeling uneasy about it is when you try to augment the perfect human. I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah. I lost you there. When you try to augment the perfect human,
that's when like the majority of people.
Strength or above normal.
Oh, I see. Not
so
to
that
supplement for some kind of a deficiency or.
Right. So that's what I was thinking when over here, I forget who said it, but they were saying something about, what's the difference between, actually it was you back here saying like a big guy that's big and muscly compared to somebody who is, mechanically enhanced. I think that when it comes to the natural or unnatural, at least according to this Encyclopedia of Bioethics, what people are scared of is that unnaturalness of, it's not fixing a deficiency, it's trying to be better than a perfect human.
But look at the piercing community. It's called body augmentation.
Well, actually, yeah.
People
like
attach
breast augmentation or something. I
breast
think that
augmentation.
the reason why that might
unnatural,
be,
yeah.
but the reason why that might be considered natural and people are like being more accepting of it is because I guess like if you look at breast augmentation, biologically men are attracted to women with bigger breasts. They can feed their babies better, so that is augmenting them to be like not necessarily better human, just like a more perfect human.
Okay, good justification.
Richard's been waiting for a while. Oh, okay. Do you want to wait longer?
I suppose this is the right time.
Okay.
We think that or feel that our machines will make us happier and more satisfied. They don't, or they don't over the long haul. In other words, when you first get a machine or something of the mechanical world, it can be very satisfying, and then after a while it loses its unusualness and becomes just part of the furniture, or it we can even feel dissatisfied. I think humans are capable of a certain amount of happiness and no more,